Okay, you guys are now being recorded for posterity. So what I'm going to do is I'm just going to start off with some code. I want to show you guys, again, just an overview of what these technologies look like in terms of the syntax. You don't have to memorize or remember much of what I'm doing right now. I just want to introduce you to what it looks like and what kind of things it does. So HTML is a declarative programming language. There are a lot of people who would disagree with calling it a programming language at all because there's nothing functional about it. There's nothing procedural about it. It's just building blocks. I think of it like Legos or Lincoln Logs or something like that. CSS is the same way. It's declarative. It looks a little bit more procedural because you have like the curly braces and you have something that looks like an object in there and so on, but it's not. JavaScript, of course, is functional and it can be used in an object-oriented manner. But most of what we'll be doing, if you guys have done like actual programming, this is going to be like a piece of cake for you. Just keep up with everything. So it is for building documents. Markup languages, that's what they're all about. So HTML, hypertext markup language, and the hypertext simply means that it's got clickable links to it. So you don't have to actually type in the address every single time in the address bar. You can just click on a link and get to where you want to go. It was created by Tim Berners-Lee around 1990 or so, and that's what really launched the World Wide Web as opposed to the internet, which existed before that time. There were other markup languages that were in contention at the time. Tim Berners-Lee gets a lot of credit, and he should get it, but there were some other ideas floating around. There's SGML, there's XML, there's other markup languages, and so on. CSS did not come about until a few years after that. I don't know if anyone here remembers the Netscape browser from back in the 90s. I know, I see gasps of horror. Netscape descended from the first browser that was worth anything at all, which was Mosaic.
The old Netscape Navigator.
Netscape Navigator.
That takes me back.
And Netscape Communicator.
What's your keyword?
Yeah, I remember trying to make stuff work in Netscape 4, and it was just it'll just make you throw your computer through the wall. Awful, awful stuff. That was the time when like Internet Explorer 6 was the good browser out there. It didn't keep that status for very long.
So you're saying at one point in time there was something good that Microsoft made?
Yeah, at least.
You rise and you fall.
I'm not sure I'd call it good. It was just better than most of the other stuff out there. Actually, the really good browser at the time was Safari. Safari 5.5 was really advanced compared to like pretty much all the other ones at the time. And that was at the time they were still making Safari for Windows. But in any case, browsers are in a much, much better place right now, I'm happy to report. So just building a document, I'm just going to show you what the basics of a document structure are. And, oops, I've still got stuff up here. Hang on, I'm popping over to my coding environment, and I've still got stuff up from last term. So let me go ahead and close this stuff. So I'm just using VS Code, which has become kind of my go-to, at least on Windows here. I do as much work on a Mac as I do on Windows, and for Mac I use like TextMate, or sometimes Visual Studio Code. They've got that for Mac too. Sometimes I use that, but TextMate is really simple. I don't know if they've even got that for Windows. I have a feeling that they don't. Go away, please. Why can't I get these notifications to stop? Thank you. Okay, so
I'm a big VS Code fan myself.
You like it?
I'm a big VS Code fan myself too. Yeah. So.
Yeah, it's a good go-to, and I'm not really taking full advantage of it because I know it's good at dealing with folders and doing project management and stuff, and I really don't use it much for that, and I should. But yeah, I'll just go ahead and create a new document here. I'm going to build a basic HTML page and just put a very few like text elements in there so we can see what it looks like, and then we will do some very simple styling using CSS. And then some very simple JavaScript to get a little bit of behavior, a little bit of interactivity here. So I'm making myself a new document, selecting a language here, HTML.
You're not sharing your screen, by the way.
I'm not?
You are not.
No.
Thank you for letting me know. That's right, I started recording, but I did not stop sharing. That was perfect, you guys. Do let me know. I don't want to go through the whole demo with like talking to myself because no one can see what I'm doing.
Yeah, you're good. I wasn't sure if you intended on sharing it, and then when you obviously that was like a big indicator to me that you were kind
Right.
of intending to. Yeah. Anyways.
Cool. Okay, so now here I am in VS Code, and I'm just going to start some. I guess we've got this. I've got this open preview to the side, so I guess I can do that, so we can kind of see what we're doing. But at some point, I'll open it up in the browser anyway, so we can take a look at it.
I'm melting. Who doesn't run dark mode? I'm sorry. Go ahead. I'm sorry.
I guess I'm a little old-fashioned. I'll have to check into that. It's probably easier on the eyes, isn't it?
Yeah, it is, especially for vampires like me who work all night and sleep all day.
I'll tell you what, it's a good idea for you guys to take care of your eyes. Mine are, just in the past couple of years, I've noticed a frightening amount of vision loss because of staring at computer monitors for the last couple of decades or so. Once it started happening real fast. So do be careful with your eyes.
It's probably because you're using light mode.
Nicely done. Okay, so this is so HTML is made up out of tags, elements really, most of which have an opening tag and a closing tag, and then the content goes inside of them. Some tags do not have an open and closing tag because they contain no content. So this is one of those. You want to start off by declaring a document type. This is kind of a leftover from XHTML and XML. If you're doing an XML document, you have to be very, very clear and specific about exactly what kind of document you're doing and what the element definitions are and so on. HTML, you can be a lot simpler. In HTML4, this was a huge double line of code that I never did get around to memorizing altogether. Even though I coded it for years and years, it was far easier just to copy and paste it. This one memorized it in about 2 seconds. HTML5 is much better than HTML4. But you always want to start with this up at the top there, even though it's not part of your document tree or anything. Just let the browser know, hey, yes, this is the kind of document type we're doing. By the way, the code size, is it okay with everyone, or do I need to zoom in?
You are good.
Yeah, you're good.
Okay, cool. So the root element is the element that contains everything else. And notice it's got the little code completion here. When I type in the open tag and then close that bracket, it gives me the closing tag there. That's what closing tags look like. It's the same as the opening tag, surrounded by the less than and greater than. But then the closing tag has the slash. And so that's what closes off an element. An element that does not have a closer, you don't have to worry about the slash at all. So the root element means that it's going to contain everything else in the document tree, except for this document type declaration up here. Inside the root element, this is going to be real difficult for you guys to remember, I know. I'm totally kidding about that. There's a head and a body. You always put those into the HTML element, and you always put them in this order. So you guys will never fail to remember this much, right? Easy peasy. Certain things always go into the head tag. There is something called a meta tag, which is like if the text elements contain the actual content of the page, the meta element contains information about the page. It doesn't get directly read by the user. It gets read by search engines and other parsing tools like the browser and so on. So you always have at least one meta in there, and you always have at least one, well, not at least one, you always have one title in there. So the title is, as you might think, it's the title of the whole web page. But more than that, it's a very important piece of information for search engine optimization. Other than the file name itself and maybe the website name, it's the very first piece of information that a web crawler like Googlebot will search for. It's probably the most important thing in there. So since I'm making a sample web page, I will probably call it a sample web page or something like that. Normally it's going to be something a little more semantic than that, a little more specific. The title is so important that your document won't even validate if you don't have a title element. You pretty much have to have one in there or else you've got an invalid web page. The meta is not that important, but it's still pretty important for parsing things. I'm going to introduce attributes at this stage of the game. So right now I've just done elements and given a little bit of content for one of the elements that is, surrounding it with open and closing tags. An attribute is something that you put into the opening tag, and the syntax looks like this. It looks like the attribute name equals, and then in quotes, whatever the name of the, or actually whatever the value of the attribute is, right? So that's the way that the syntax works. Okay, so punctuation. You can use double quotes or you can use single quotes if you prefer. Almost everyone does double quotes for declarative languages like CSS and HTML. If I ever don't do that, it'll just because I've been writing too much JavaScript, and I like single quotes for JavaScript. Oh, I misspelled attribute. There we go. It doesn't matter because this is just the syntax. What I'm actually going to put in here is a character set, or char set as it's shortened to, and equals UTF-8, like that. So this is just letting the browser know what character set we're using, and that just helps with the performance of the web page. There's another one that can help with the performance of the web page. I'll put it on the HTML element here. That is to specify the language. Lang equals EN. So EN for English, and then the character set UTF-8. These two things together will just help the browser parse through the web page a little bit more easy, a little bit more quickly. So there are plenty of other things that may go into the head element. For instance, you might see a script element in here that contains or calls in some JavaScript. You might see a link element that calls in an external CSS page. I'll use both of those. I'll do both of those, but I'm just going to start with this for right now, and we'll put those in a little bit later on. It's probably a good time to save this document here. I'm going to save this, and what am I going to call this? I'm going to call this sample, since it is a sample web page. And let's see, let me find my way to our class here, IS250, and good, I don't have any units yet. Something about spaces and file names. I very commonly put spaces in file names, as you just saw. I just typed in unit space 1 for that. But with actual file names that we work with, it's much more common to do hyphens. Whenever you've got two words or numbers or whatever that are getting put together, use hyphens for them for your file names, for HTML, CSS, and JavaScript, and so on. That's what you're usually going to see, and that's what I'll push you guys to do for that reason. Okay, so we've got the body element. So if the head is the stuff that's information about the document, then this is kind of the document itself. Actually, the whole thing is the document, but this is the stuff that the user will actually see when they open up your web page, the stuff that will actually appear in the browser window. The title actually shows up as well, as we'll see. It shows up as the tab text. If you've got multiple tabs open in a browser, then that's the text that will show up in that tab to let you know which one you might want to tab to. So that's another important reason to have it in there. If you don't have it in there, it'll just say like untitled document or something like that, which is no fun. So far, this is all document stuff, structural stuff. I'm going to start off with a generic div, which depending on who you ask is either a divider or a division. I think it's technically actually a division, but I could be wrong about that. But a div is just kind of a bucket to put stuff into. It doesn't have any semantic meaning. What I mean by that, by the way, semantic, you like the semantic web and so on. It's very simple. A semantic tag is simply something that says something about what kind of content it contains. For instance, a div as a division doesn't say anything about what kind of content it's in there. It could be a navigation list, it could be a heading, it could be paragraphs of text, it could be all kinds of different things. And it would all be all under div. It doesn't say anything about it. On the other hand, title is a semantic tag because it says, yeah, this is the title of the web page in here. It lets you know immediately what kind of content it is. That doesn't mean that non-semantic elements are bad. It just means that you have to understand the difference between those two. Sometimes semantic elements are called for, and sometimes they're not important. So this is our non-semantic generic bucket for stuff. It's a structural element. So are there other buckets, structural buckets that do have semantic meaning. And yeah, there are some, and we'll definitely go over those. There's a header, there's a footer, there's a main element, there's an article, figure, there's all kinds of stuff that we'll learn later on. So just the generic one for now. And then let me go ahead and put some comments in here. So you guys know about commenting in code. Unfortunately, in HTML, there's really only one kind of comment. There's not like a single line comment and a multi-line comment. It's all just one thing, and it's kind of chunky or clunky. You have to type in this to start with. It's the brackets, just like all the elements are, and then the exclamation, dash, dash, and then dash, dash, close brackets. So that's what a comment looks like. Again, it doesn't matter if you're doing a single line comment or a multi-line comment. It all looks like this in HTML. So these, what I've been talking about to starting with, these are the document elements, right? And then the div here, I'm going to call this a structural element. And then some of the stuff that I'm going to put inside here, I'm going to call hierarchical elements. And what most people mean by that is just text elements. And it's called hierarchical because you've got different heading levels. So you've got like an H1, which you could think of as being the biggest text on the page. And then an H2 is a little bit smaller than that one, and so on and so forth. And the paragraphs are the body text. So we'll go into those in more detail, of course. But let's go ahead and do a couple. So an H1 is the top level heading. You can do an H1 through H6, and they'll give you different sizes. Notice that nothing has shown up over here yet. But when I actually get some content in here, I'm expecting something to show up on the preview pane here. Normally, you have an H1 at the top of the page, and that is like the website name. In this case, it's just a page. So I'm going to repeat what I got in the title, which is what you often see. Not a requirement or anything, but it's very common. A sample web page, and hey, look at there, I've got a web page showing up on the preview pane. Once I get a couple of more in there, we'll also open it up in a browser and take a look at it, see how it looks. So if I do an H2, this would be a second level heading and so on. I just want to mention for the first time, and I will mention it again as we go forward, that this is hierarchical and not sequential. That means that I don't do H1, H2, H3, H4, H5, H6 going on down until I run out of them. But you might have several H2s that show up here all at the same heading level. If that doesn't make sense yet, don't worry about it. I'll reinforce that over the next couple of class periods. Let's do at least one paragraph. So this is a paragraph, or this is, maybe I should do something about the website. This is my very first web page, right? And I know that you guys know that we're supposed to do like a hello world, but I don't know. I don't really feel like HTML is a good place for that because it's so non-procedural. Here I've got a little bit of a syntax error. I missed the bracket. There we go. And yeah, this will be enough to start us off with. So we've already got some comments in there. Let's go ahead and take a look in the browser. It should look very much like this, except that this one already has a style applied to it. And when we open up the browser, the text will look different, I'm expecting, because it will not have a style applied to it. So let me pop over here and see if I can find where I saved that thing to. What are we doing? Unit 1. And here is our sample.html. To crack this open in a browser, all I need to do is double click on it and it should open up in Edge. Or I could right click on it and do open with. And there it is. So you see the text looks a little bit different. Over here, let's see, where was I? You see how it looks like it's a sans serif type and it's got maybe some spacing in here that looks a little bit different. This one here does not. That's just because VS Code is automatically applying its own style sheet to this. And again, if that doesn't make sense, don't worry, we're going to do it. It's I'm talking about CSS. Like the client can add their own CSS before you even touch it. And actually, this one is getting a little bit of CSS too, because these are spaced out and the text is a little bit differently sized and so on. But later on, we're going to be controlling all that stuff with our own CSS, which I shall do right now. Before I do, any questions about just the basics of what a web page looks like in HTML? With the
Not that, but you
understanding,
gotta explain how to get that preview sample in there.
oh, I think that it was maybe an extension that I did. Let's see, what do I have? HTML preview, maybe? Maybe that's the one I'm using. But if you go over here and search extensions and just type in preview, then you should be able to find something that will preview your code over there. Otherwise, you can just preview it in the browser.
Got it. Thank you.
Cool. Okay, good. Other questions? Okay, cool. Let's go ahead and get some CSS applied here. Now, CSS can be its own document completely separately, and I'll show you how to do that. But probably the simplest way to do it for now is just to go ahead and build it in the same document here. And I'm going to do that by, in the head element, I told you there might be some other elements up here inside head, style. And then once you get into the content of the style element, we're now entering a different language. We're no longer typing in HTML, we're now typing in CSS. It's just like a separate little sandbox that we've got for another language. We'll have the same thing when we do some scripting in JavaScript. So CSS is also declarative, and it's basically split into selectors and then declarations inside code block. So the selector is when I tell it what the elements on here I want it to format, and then the declarations are, what I want to change about it and what I want to change it to. So let's say I want to select for the div here. I want to do some formatting on this div that has these different text elements in it. Well, all I have to do is type in div. I don't have to put it in the brackets or anything. Remember, this is a different language now. This is CSS. And then I use the curly braces. Wrong ones. There we go. And I mean, it looks for all the world almost like an object in JavaScript or something, but it's not quite. And then I can select different properties and the values that I want to change those properties to. So let's say I do like a background. I want a different background color on this. I can do a background, and then let's see, I happen to know some of the English-based names for these, although generally we'll be using the hex values. But for instance, if I do light steel blue, and notice that I get a different background color there now. I've already got this open in a browser, so if I just pop over here to the browser, to my sample web page, and just refresh it, Control R, and did I not save it? I did not save it. I have to save it first. Then I go over here and refresh, and there we go. Now, I'm sure that VS Code has a live preview where it'll make changes in the browser as it detects changes that you make to the code. I know that Brackets does. So I just have to figure out what that is and get it.
Yep, it's actually it's called Live Preview by Microsoft.
Okay, so
yeah, it should. If you search preview, it'll be the first one there, and then you can just it'll have a hotkey of Control-Shift-V, and that'll.
Yeah, so after you said that for the extensions, I installed Live Preview, and it's showing me Live Preview exactly as I type it.
Okay, awesome. By long experience, I know that I'm not going to mix it up on myself in the middle of the demo, but I will check it out as soon as the demo's over and hopefully get that going for you guys next time. In the meantime, I'll just flip back and forth and do it that way.
You're good, Prof.
Awesome.
Don't worry about it.
Okay, so let's see. I know, like as a designer, I don't like the fact that the text looks like it's touching the edge of the box now, so I can give it some padding, just a little bit of spacing that goes inside the element. Like so. That looks better to me already. What in the world are M's? I guess we'll talk about that at some point. Again, time's a little bit tight. But basically an M is the size of the type, if that makes sense. So the baseline size of the type is this paragraph text here, and that is the size that I told it to make the padding all the way around, more or less. So that's something that I can do. I can also do... let's take a look at it in the browser here. Let's make sure that things are happening. Save and refresh. There we go. And look at all this extra space out here. I don't like that. So let's give it a max width of, I don't know, I could keep using M's. I could type in like 40M, something like that. and refresh over here, and it just contains it a little bit more. And maybe I would also like it in the center of the web page or center of the browser window instead of being hugging over the left side here. So we'll give it a margin of 0 and auto. So as we'll learn, sometimes you can put more than one value in here, and the browser will understand that you're meaning different dimensions in this case. So in this case, if I've got 2 values under margin, it's going to give the first value to top and bottom and the second one to the left and right. So it's got to have a margin of 0 on top and bottom and a margin of auto left and right, which automatic kind of fight with each other and centers the thing in the middle of the page. To this day, I don't know if that was a feature or a bug, but whatever it is, we've been using it for a long, long time. Let's see.
It's a bug that became a feature.
Yeah, exactly. But it may have been done on purpose. I don't know. But it looks like a bug to me. Just the fact that this worked doesn't seem like something planned, but maybe it was. I never got around to looking it up. And let's say I like this type or something like it, and I don't like this scraggly looking Times New Roman here. So maybe I'll go ahead and do, actually I could still put this under div since everything's in there. I'm going to go ahead and select for the body element. So you don't have to select for elements that are inside the kind of page here, but you can also select for body, and you can even select for the HTML element, and sometimes it's useful to do that. And let's go ahead and give it a font face. Wait a second, is it font face? It's font family. I'm thinking of something else. Font family. And then, it gives you these little things. I mean, the most basic ones for sans serif is to do Arial and Helvetica. Let's go ahead and try it and see how it looks. So if I save that, and yeah, it looks a little bit different over here, but now the preview will match the browser better because they're both doing the same thing. Instead of each accessing their own client CSS, they're now doing my CSS, the one that I just typed it in. As the joke goes, I reject your style sheet and substitute my own. And that's what we're doing here, which leads us to, like, what does CSS mean? So the SS part of it just means style sheet, which makes sense. The C is cascading. It's a cascading style sheet. And the cascade is a very complex system of, what's the right word for it? Specificity. Which style sheet, if you have clashing rules, as we did there, right? The browser has its own style sheet, and then I have mine. Which one is considered more specific, so which one overrules the other one? In this case, it's top level. My style sheet overwrites the browser's. If it didn't, we wouldn't be able to do any formatting at all. So more on that later, but yeah, that's what the C in CSS means, the cascading style sheet. And let's see, what else do we want to do? I don't know, let's just do one more piece of type formatting here. Let's specify the paragraph. So instead of grabbing the whole page or the whole document, we'll just grab this one here. And maybe we think that the paragraph should still be sans serif. So I'll do a font family. And I don't like the Times New Roman though. I'm going to choose this Georgia Times New Roman Times Serif. What does this mean? This is called a font stack or a font list. And basically what it does, it says, okay, use Georgia if it's available. And it's talking about on the user's machine, the client's machine. And if the user doesn't have Georgia, then you can use Times New Roman. It's a way of kind of being sure that at least your code will, or rather your page will look at least something close to what you intended. There we go. So I'm still having the sans serif for the headings, but I'm going back to Georgia serif for the paragraphs, which is probably a little easier to read in some cases at least. And yeah, I think that's probably enough here to get us started off, just showing you like what the syntax looks like. You can probably see how different this looks from the HTML, but it's another declarative language. So any question about the CSS? Okay, good. Now before we go, oh yeah, go ahead.
I said no, all good. I'm sorry.
No, all good, no problem. So what I meant to do before doing the CSS is I wanted to show you guys about validation. So validating your code online, which is fine. I'm just going to go ahead and I don't know, I'll just delete this stuff for right now. I should be able to Control Z my way back to it if I need it. But let's say before we type in any CSS, let's go ahead and try to validate this. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to go to a website. Let me open up a new tab here. And this is going to be the new HTML checker. Now, the w3.org, the World Wide Web Consortium, has been offering HTML validation for a long time. And the textbook tells you to go to validator.w3.org. I don't recommend doing that one because it is designed for an older HTML. If you go to new.validator, wait, is it validator.new? I can't remember. Let's go ahead and just look it up. So HTML new NU validator, and you'll find it. I put this in a link under the useful links, so you can just go look it up there. But if you type in something like this, then you'll find it. And so this is one place you can get to it. That is not the link that I gave. I'm surprised it's not popping up here. It's validator.nu, this guy right here. But another way to get there is to actually go to the validator.w3.org/new. So either way is okay. It'll get you this place where, very simple web page, where you can either upload a file and check it, or you can copy and paste your text in here, or you can go to an actual address online. Now I think I saved this. Let me double check that I did. No, I didn't. Let me go ahead and save that. So I'll go ahead and do the file upload because that's probably the easiest one. So I check by file upload, and then it gives you a little choose file button here. And let me find, once again, that file, unit 1, and this is the sample.html. And you can check like what you want it to show. Maybe I'll go ahead and show the source in the outline here, and go ahead and click on check. And what you're looking for when you check this, you're looking for this big green bar at the top. And if you see the big green bar, then you're pretty much good to go, unless we start talking more about like the document outline and trying to get that structured properly. We probably won't get there this semester. And then if you check on like the source, then it'll show you what your HTML looks like. So let me just do something real quick to it here. I'm going to, like, say I knock out one of these closing brackets. Okay, I just forget to type it in or whatever. And let's go ahead and try uploading that again. Same file. I just want to show you what it looks like when it does not validate. There you go. I start seeing red up at the top. Error. Notice I only removed one little piece of punctuation, but I wound up with 3 errors. That's because if you screw up the punctuation, then it can affect things later on. Like it doesn't know how to parse the rest of the page properly, at least until it gets to a certain point where it thinks it's seen enough closing tags that it can move on. So this is, I'll tell you guys right now, when you guys submit HTML to me, your homework or your exercises, this is like pretty much the first thing I do. I mean, I do a quick look over to see what the documents look like and if they're named properly and so on. Like the very next thing I do is I upload them to this validator file or this validator web app. So you need to do this before turning anything into me, because you know that it's the first thing I'm going to do once you have turned it in. So you can like save yourself a lot of points just by looking for it here. So look at the error messages, right? Like I saw an open bracket when I was expecting an attribute name, and you may, probable cause missing this immediately before, and it's saying at line 20. So I go back over here and I look at line 20. This is something I'm pointing out because that very often the line number itself is not where you will see the error or the problem. Very often it's something right before that. So it said line 20. Yeah, it's right before that. I go ahead and fix it, and then that'll fix the problem. And then once
So just a heads up as well, at least with VS Code and a lot of at least halfway decent code editors, when you have syntax errors, you'll have color changing, like text that follows the syntax error.
Yeah.
So if you pay attention while you're coding it, you really shouldn't even need to get that far, at least in regards to syntax itself.
Yeah, that's right. That's right. With syntax.
When it comes to content, the coding, whatever you're using for coding isn't going to know the difference, but at least syntax it'll follow.
That's right. Yeah. And that I mean, you made a good point that it won't catch everything. Like if I put in, there's some things like I don't know about HTML yet. So if I put like a list item inside of a paragraph and I think it's okay, then the validator tool will also catch that stuff.
Right. Okay. Yeah.
Cool. So yeah, that is the new validator. Although again, there seem to be two different addresses for it. Let me just pop over here real quick. Let me see what link I gave you guys in the useful links here. Yeah, so validator.nu, this is the link that I gave you, the new HTML checker. Oh, it's not going to let me do that. Huh? Thank you, Google. Validator.nu. Yeah, it takes you, I mean, it's the same interface, but you see it's a different domain. It doesn't go to the actual w3.org domain anymore. But either way, it's fine. They both work the same way. Okay, so that is that. Let me do Control Z a couple times because I'd like to get my CSS back here. There is, by the way, there's also a CSS validator. Now, CSS validation is not nearly as big a deal as HTML validation. The structure of your document, the correctness of your document is all important for accessibility, for SEO, for all kinds of reasons. The CSS, yeah, it's kind of what works, right? Whatever works. So it's not as big a deal. And I'm not going to be checking the validation of your CSS, at least not very often. But there is another page for that. So if you go to jigsaw.w3.org, they do provide a CSS validator. So if you click on the link down here and go to the CSS validation, this looks very similar to the old HTML validator that we've got. Now let's see. Okay, so yeah, they got the different tabs up here. I forgot about that. So this time I'll do by direct input. So I can just grab this stuff and copy it, paste it right in here, and check it. And congratulations, no errors found. But if there were an error, then it would let me know. So I'm showing you this again, not because it's super important, but because it's a way of kind of checking your own work, right? So you can pop it in here and you can see, oh, whoops, there are errors here. It'll let you know where they are and you can fix them. So there's that. And then, okay, enough said. Let's go on to the JavaScript here. So the JavaScript, when you type in your own script, you generally want to put it at the end of the document. And the reason why is because JavaScript very often operates on elements within the page. And you want to make sure that the page loads completely, or as completely as possible, before your JavaScript starts firing in a synchronous manner that can screw everything up. Now, in order for your code to validate, it has to go either inside the head or inside the body. And so to be as close to the end of the document as possible, after this div, we'll go ahead and put a script tag down here. Oops, yeah, it did it for me. So yeah, if you see a script element, now you'll see older code that says like script type equals text/JavaScript or something like that, or app/JavaScript. It's really not necessary anymore. It hasn't been necessary for a long time. Just go ahead and do script, it's fine. And this is where you're going to like create behaviors or interactivity beyond what CSS can provide for you. So just taking a look at what this stuff does real quickly. Well, you know what? Let's do it in the browser first, because you can run JavaScript right in the browser without doing anything here at all. I'm going to save this document. I'm going to pop over to the browser here, and I have this open somewhere. There it is, a sample web page. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to look at a couple of things here. Let's take a look at the source code in the browser, and then we'll take a look at the inspector and the console. So to look at the source code of any web page that you can find online, it's generally going to be the same kind of shortcut. It's going to be either Control-U or Control-Shift-U, depending on what the browser. I think Firefox does just Control-U, but I think that this one's Control-Shift-U.
A sample web page.
No, okay, that's not
Second
it.
level.
It's kind of cool that it's got that built into the browser, though. Okay, Control-U, that was it. So it's one of those two, or Control-Alt-U, something like this. And notice this is just the stuff that I was just typing in. So this is good to know because while you're getting to know HTML and so on, This is pretty much the way I learned HTML back in the day. I mean, I had a couple of textbooks, but the way I really learned was when I looked at web pages and thought, ooh, what is that? How do they do that? How do they structure this thing? And you can look at the source code with Control U or Control Shift U, and you get to see it. And of course, you can download a web page and look at it in the code editor too. But yeah, it's a useful thing to know. But this is the static page. So this is the source code. It's called that because, yeah, this is the document as we retrieved it from the server or whatever. Nothing's been done to this. No JavaScript has acted upon this or anything. It's like the starting state of the document. Now, if I do something a little bit different, if I do Control-Shift-I for inspector, it'll open up this guy. You can also, I'm sure you guys know this probably, you just right-click on an element and go to inspect. You can also do the page source thing there. But inspect, this will get you to the inspector or the console. And in the console here, you can type in JavaScript commands and just test things out. It's like a sandbox that's been provided by the browser. As far as I know, all of the major browsers give you some kind of console to work with, although Safari hides it from you until you change a couple of preferences, which I was always irritated by. So let me just do something really obnoxious to start off with. I'm just going to type in one of the built-in functions in JavaScript, and this time I will do a hello world. Should I do I can't remember if you do an exclamation point. I guess we do. So I'm just typing this into the sandbox. I'll hit enter, and boom, look at this. I get a little alert popping up. Now, this is something that you should pretty much never do, right? The last thing you want to do is forget that you have this in your code somewhere and then have someone show up at one of your pages and see this dumb message pop up like this. But if you just like wanted to see, hey, is the JavaScript working in this browser, then you can do this. A much more common thing to do in development instead of alert would be like logging this to the console. So if I do like console.log hello world, then what will happen instead of this pop-up, it'll spit it out here to the console. So if I hit enter there and see it just showed up hello world. So this is the way you normally do things in development, because then if you forget and leave it in there, your users will never see it because it'll be here in the console and it won't show up over the web page.
Just as a quick side note, though, if you forget and leave it in there, you also leave yourself open to being hacked as well, because you have cross-site scripting vulnerabilities and code execution and things like that. Anyways, that's way deeper, and I'll leave that alone.
Yeah, that's potentially a concern. In fact, if you go to some pages, including, I believe, Google Classroom, it'll give you a warning about that. Let me see if I'm right about that. So if I go to the Classroom here and do my Control-Shift-I, and yeah, look at that. So this is telling exactly what you were just talking about. And I love this part. Do not enter code that you do not understand. But please back away slowly. So yeah, you're absolutely right if you go too far with it. So let's see, where was I? Here we go. So here's the console. We just did something. I can do, like I can declare a variable, which I can use either var or let, which I like much better. It's a more recent one, addition to JavaScript. And you can start selecting for elements on the page here. So let's say I do let me select the div. I'll select, remember we've got one div on the page here that contains these three text elements. So let's say I say let div, which is my variable name, equal. And I'm just going to select for that by doing a document.query selector and div. Now, if I just hit enter, it just returns undefined because I didn't tell it to do anything with it. But then if I type in div and hit enter, first of all, it highlights this on the page. Most browsers will do that at this point. And then if I hit enter, it shows me the element. There's the div element, and there's the stuff inside of it. So what I'm seeing here, which we'll start learning about towards the end of the semester, this is the document object model right here. This is the DOM. This is not the same thing as the web page here. JavaScript operates on the web page, and the DOM can change state as you do things to it. So for instance, if I were to change the text of one of these things, the DOM would change to reflect that change, but the original document, the source code, would not change. And if I did that Control U, even after like changing a bunch of stuff, it would still show the original document unchanged. So it's kind of about maintaining state. That's what frameworks like Vue and React and so on are all about, is providing a nice state engine that you can use to keep track of differences between states and so on. Enough said about that. So that's what this is all about. If I wanted to do, I don't know, well, let's do less. I showed you with the console. When you're testing stuff, when you're trying out JavaScript, this is where you want to go, because you can't really break anything here. Even if you break the page entirely, I can refresh and it'll get things back the way they were. So let's before we go back to the document, let's check that one thing. I'm going to do, let's see, what should we do here? Let's add an event listener to the page, which usually is going to be a click. So when the user clicks on the page, then something will happen. So I'm going to do div. I'm going to add an event to a div. So div.add event listener. And just as a reminder, you guys totally do not need to remember this stuff. I'm just kind of showing you some stuff to how it looks, right? And then let's do E. And let's see, let's go back to doing our little alert here. So yeah. Okay, let's see, is that right? Yeah, div event listener, div, no, that's not right. Not div, but I got to tell it what kind of event. Click, that's what I meant to type in there. So this ought to do it. Div event, click E. E is the event itself. Okay, so remember when I didn't tell it to do anything, it adds undefined. But now when I click on this div, I should get this guy every time I click. So you're adding, like you're changing something about the page, right? That's something that wasn't there before, and you did that by modifying the DOM over here. So, but the sandbox nature of this means that any time that the page gets refreshed, all the stuff that I did goes away. So if I hit Control R to refresh the page here, and now I click on this div and nothing's happening. Now, in case you feel like, oh no, all my hard work is done, it's kind of like the console in Terminal or something. You just hit the up arrow and it gives you the last thing that you did. So I'm going to take this stuff, just those two things, and I'm going to copy them and get them into the document instead. So here we go. Let div equal document.querySelector div, semicolon, and then arrow down to get to the next one. Copy it, paste it into the document. Oh, come here. There we go. And now when I save that, it stays in the document. It stays there when the thing is refreshed. So now I hit the thing, and now I don't need the console anymore. Let's get rid of that. Refresh the page, and we've got that awful event that I just added. So anytime the user clicks on this, they're going to get that pop-up window. And I could do other stuff, like instead of doing alert, I could do, console.log. Save that, open the console back up again, and refresh, and then whenever I click on this, instead of getting that irritating alert, it'll just pop over here into the console. Okay, let's see, it's almost 8 o'clock. I think we're probably just about done for the day here. I think that, oh, okay, so the last two things I was going to show you, let's see if I get to them or not. Let's just take a look, since we did HTML validation and CSS validation, let's do a little bit of JavaScript validation too. So the one that I like is not the one, everyone uses JSLint, and I really don't like JSLint because it's way too opinionated about how I'm supposed to be coding things. Like even to the point of telling me I should use spaces instead of tabs, it's none of its business. But I do like JSHint, which is probably the next biggest one. JavaScript code quality tool. It doesn't even call it it's a linter basically. So let me grab some of my code and see what it thinks about it. So I'm just going to grab this here, copy, And it gives you kind of some code to start with here, so you just kind of get rid of that and then paste it on in there, and in real time it'll let you know what's going on with it. So it's telling me, yeah, let is a newer thing in JavaScript. If you're worried about older browsers, maybe you want to use var instead. The arrow function syntax that I'm using here is also a newer thing. And looks like I'm missing a semicolon, and it's right there. I have a habit of forgetting semicolons because you often actually don't need them in JavaScript. It'll work without it. But if I put that in, that little thing goes away, and now my instructor's happy, and so on and so forth. So JS Hint, I think that's the one that I linked in classroom materials. This is the one that I like. It's not really opinionated. It just lets me know if there are warnings or if something's actually wrong with it. Last thing I will show you, and I promise I will cut you guys loose. Instead of having this in this document, you could also have the script in an outboard document, a JavaScript file. So I'm going to X this. I'm going to make a new document, call it JavaScript, and paste this stuff into there. Ooh, it was smart. It took out the extra tabs. I like that. And I'm going to save this as, well, I've got everything as sample here, so I'm just going to call this sample.js. And I will probably put it in a subfolder called JS, just to get these things out of the way. File management is something I'll talk to you guys about more, well, especially when we get to like media and image files and so on. So now, since I cut this, if I save this and go to the browser and refresh, then this isn't working anymore, right? Because the JavaScript is gone. So how to get it back in there? Well, I'm still going to use a script tag. But this time, I'm going to do an attribute. Remember those guys like we did up here for lang equals n and char set equals utf-8. And we will go down here and do source src equals js/sample.js. And code very nicely lets me know what it's looking for. And now when I go over here and refresh, the behavior is back. Hooray. Let's do the same thing with the CSS. I'm going to cut this from the style and put it in its own document. This is going to be a CSS document. And paste, there we go. And let's call this one sample.css. And again, put it in a little subfolder, get it out of the way. You can call this one style or styles or CSS is what I usually use. Anything like that's fine. Same thing goes for media files when we get to those. Like if you have images, you put them to an images subfolder. You don't want like everything littering your root directory. And if you have media files, you make a media subfolder, things like that. Okay, so this has now been taken out. So if I save this and go to the browser and refresh, all of my nice formatting is gone. Let's get it back in there. You can use the style element to bring it in, but what's much more common is to use a link element. You do rel relation equals style sheet. And then instead of source, you do href. It means hyperreference. I don't know why it doesn't use source instead. That would actually make more sense. CSS/sample.css, looky there. Don't forget the closing bracket. Save. Go back over here and refresh, and my styling is back again. And so is my behavior. So this way, I wanted to show you it's much more common and even considered somewhat better practice to have these things outboard instead of including them all within the same HTML document. It's just, I mean, it's called separation of concerns. It's not really separation of concerns, but it's kind of a window for that, if that makes sense. It's kind of an emulation of that. All right, I think that I have thrown enough your guys' way for tonight. Any questions about any of the stuff that I just went through other than, oh my gosh, I have to see that again?
Not really. It's quite a bit.
It is quite
Definitely
a bit.
takes time to absorb it all.
Totally understand, and hopefully that wasn't too much. Basically, that was my way of having you guys make it so that you can pretty much skim chapter 2, because that's pretty much what I'm doing here by introducing all these guys.
Not at all. Great reference point.
Okay, cool. I'm going to go ahead and stop the recording now.